Everybody, this is Mariana Smolček, your eTwinning Inclusive Education Group moderator. I am very happy to welcome you all to our fifth expert talk in the Inclusive Education Group. Today we have an expert from Croatia, Dragana Bolješić, and Dragana will soon talk about dyslexia and the personal perspective of dyslexia, and also another theory that she has been dealing with recently. Before we start, I would just like to say to all of you who are or aren't member maybe of the Inclusive Education Group yet, few just information. We are now a group of 1,470 European teachers. So far we had 5 expert talks, including this one. This is our 5th talk. We had 3 Twitter eTwin chats, 1 group eTwinning text Mac tools sharing, and if you remember, that was very successful, and we created an ebook with various Web 2.0 tools. We also shared nice and interesting materials and strategies, ideas on Padlet for the campaign of autism awareness. And I must say there have been many forum posts, and you have shared your own materials. Also, next year, I hope I'm going to invite you to be the main role of the Inclusive Education Group, where you are going to be given more work and more activities, and I hope we are going to make our group one of the best eTwinning groups. As you know, everything is archived in our group, all the expert talks, all the Twitter chats and group events. You will see and find the recordings, and also I have been sharing some Twitter badges for all the Twitterers, those who are usually sharing and maybe collaborating in the eTwin Edu chat. Make sure that we are on social media. We have the Twitter account @eTwinedu. Also use the hashtag @eTwinedu whenever you can, especially even today if you want to take screenshots and maybe share what we have been discussing here. Please like the Facebook and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. But the best thing is, I think, to subscribe the newsletter. Because there are still some problems with the eTwin group, emailing is a problem, and I think to stay in contact, it's good to be on social media and to be subscribed to our newsletter. And finally, join us, invite others. Let's hope we have 2,000 people by the end of this 2016. And I hope the group is on the eTwinning. You can easily find it. You can just put on the search Inclusive Education, and you will find the group Simona. No problem. Everybody who is in the group today, you are going to. I'm going to paste later in the chat the Google form for you to fill in and to get your certificate. And you can share the email you want me to send you the certificate of participation. Okay, so now I can go with my guest speaker, or our guest speaker, Dragana Bolješić. Dragana is an English language teacher who is currently working in secondary education. She has also worked as an interpreter and translator, and I'm going to stress this, as you will see later. She worked as officer of the Australian Department of Immigration in Vienna and Melbourne. She's seriously into education and education transformation, as advocated by Sir Ken Robinson. She also promotes democratic education and model as practice in free schools around the world. The topic dyslexia is very interesting for all of us, for all the educators, I would say parents and teachers as well. How does it feel and why does it occur, and can it be helped, is something Dragana is going to tell us and share, I would say, a revolutionary approach, because she got a book, as she would describe in her own words. The book found its way towards her hands, and she's going to share the insights that she has gained, that she thinks will help us better be equipped and to be more aware in how to work with our dyslexic students. So Dragana, I'm not going to talk anymore. Thank you one more time for joining us. I'm going to get your presentation ready. Your mic is on, and we are all going to listen carefully. I'm going to mute my mic and I'm going to turn off my camera. So Dragana, thank you one more time. Thank you for joining us, and the mic is yours.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you for this introduction. I would like to greet you all. This is the first time I'm doing a webinar with Mariana. So far, I was always, like everyone else, a participant, sitting comfortably at home and listening to presentations from other people. Mariana asked me to do this because when I started working with her, we work at the same school at the moment. I'm replacing a teacher there who's on maternity leave. When she found out that I'm a dyslexic person, she asked me if I would like to do a presentation on dyslexia. So bear in mind, I am not a specialist. I have never been trained to teach dyslexic children or to teach about dyslexia. I'm a sufferer, so to speak. But I don't think the dyslexia is an illness. It just isn't. It's just a state of mind. Dyslexic people perceive words and numbers, and I would venture to say even the world around them differently, and their brains interpret those inputs differently, and that's why they face some problems in the real world, but they mostly overcome them. I have overcome mine. It took a while, but I'm there. I made a PowerPoint presentation which unfortunately couldn't be uploaded. So what you hopefully are also seeing in front of you now is what a PowerPoint presentation looks like when it's turned into a PDF file. So my first slide is there to give you an insight into what written text looks like for a dyslexic person. So if you click on the link above, I'm going to do it now as well. This is what it looks like. So everything becomes alive. The text is not static. It's moving around, and that's what's making a dyslexic person incapacitated, or in other words, unable to read. Okay, now just to go back to the original slide. I hope this has given you an impression, and I wonder if you have ever seen this. Thanks to computer technology nowadays, and to these beautiful presentations, even people who are not dyslexic can now get a feel of what it is like. My personal experience makes the first part of my presentation, and then after that I will present the revolutionary idea presented in a book that is really exceptional, and you will get to see why. But first of all, I would like to share with you what growing up with dyslexia was like for me. My father worked in an office, and he brought pencils and paper home when my sister and myself were really young. I was aged 5 or 6 and she was 3 years younger. So we learned our first letters at that time. He didn't want to teach us, but we had many questions about letters and we wanted to learn them. And both of us did. The problem was for me that my sister was able to read and I wasn't. She was able to string the letters into words, and I couldn't do that. I didn't at that time, of course, know what was wrong. I didn't even suspect that anything was wrong, but I just wondered, how she was doing it. But being older and wiser, I soon developed a trick where I would listen to what she was reading, and I would memorize that, and then I would sort of be able to read myself. And okay, I just looked at chat wondering what was going on, but you're chatting, which is great. I cannot read the chat, mind you. I cannot read the chat and do my presentation at the same time. So if you do have any questions for me, please remember to ask me later. And I'm sure Mariana will also coordinate that part. Anyway, when I started going to school, that is when I realized that something was wrong with me, because most of my schoolmates were reading and writing without any trouble. Some had troubles, and that was good for me from my perspective, because at that time I still sort of hoped that it was something that I was going to grow out of, and not being referred to any specialists at that time. We're talking about the 70s in former country, in Yugoslavia. My mother at that time had never heard of dyslexia, and I'm pretty sure neither have my teachers, because they didn't know how to help me. They couldn't understand what was going on when I would simply not be able to read, and when I complained that the lines were sort of moving, that there was something wrong with the text. Of course, my eyesight was checked and it was perfect, but it was really, really awful, and I felt that I was different. I can't remember what I thought actually, but it didn't feel nice. It was I felt inadequate, and otherwise in spoken language I was really good. Even when I was a little child, my grandmother taught me many songs and rhymes, and I could repeat them, and I was really good at that. So at school, in primary school, grade 1 to 4, I was marked, labeled as a slow reader, and that was it. Nobody really paid any attention to me and to what was happening with my reading and writing abilities, because writing was also not very representative. I had terrible handwriting. No one could read it. I persisted in this method of actually learning texts by heart, because my mother couldn't help me, and all that she could think of was to read everything that was in the textbook. She read with me before lessons. So I was very smart in class, because I was learning ahead of everyone else, and I could always put my hand up and give good answers to questions. Even today, I have problems with long words, but the lines have stopped dancing. So I have learned to read. I can read now. The diagnosis was made when I was 14 years old. Finally, I came across a teacher who knew about dyslexia, and she actually figured it out through the constant problem that I had of getting bad marks in my math exams. And she was wondering what was going on, because I was doing well in class, and if she asked me to come to the blackboard and do a problem with her, I would do it. And so one time she took the test and she looked at it, and what she worked out is that I have copied everything wrongly from the blackboard. And that's when my parents were asked to come into school, and we had a talk with a specialist, a speech therapist. But because I was already reading at that time and I wasn't falling behind in the classroom work, or I was an excellent student, they sort of suggested that I go on as I have done so far, and I wasn't included in any dyslexic learning. If I'm reading something for the first time, and if it is a topic in my field, in education or anything else that I'm familiar with, I read without a problem. But if it's not in my league, if there are many words that I have not come across, then I struggle. When I'm in a position to read aloud, even now, I make mistakes, and I often misread, or I have to stop to work out some words. It continues to be very stressful for me because of the trauma I suffered in primary school. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but remember the child in your class who had problems reading, and try to remember the expression on the face of that child. And if you are an emphatic person, you must have felt for that child who was not able to read. It needn't have been a dyslexic child. It could have just been a child who had problems reading. And in every classroom around the world, there are such children. There are children who struggle with reading, not necessarily dyslexic, but have problems mastering a skill that is very demanding. And psychologists now tell us, and different schools of education also tell us that reading is a very individual affair, and that for some children it takes longer. As far as spelling is concerned, I don't think I make more mistakes than others, but I don't really know, because now I'm not in classroom situations anymore where I have to write and be marked. Modern technology, of course, has made a tremendous change in my life. I write everything using a computer, and I have check spelling turned on all the time. And I like the fact that when I misspell something, I can have a look at the word. And what usually happens is that I have all the letters, but they're just not in the right sequence, in the right place. And it's not just because I'm using a keyboard. It happens when I handwrite something. These things can happen. But being 50, I can now say, even in classroom situations, I openly say to my students that I'm dyslexic, and that if they notice that I have misspelled something, that they should point it out to me, and they do, which is really, really great. And actually, it's a really good trick, because then I know that they're paying attention, and they're learning a lot from my mistakes. And yes. Now, that as far as my personal experience is concerned, of course, these are just the most important issues. Now we're going to have a look at a few slides where I'm using information that I obtained online. Because I've lived in Australia for 8 years, I usually tend to refer to Australian sites, and Australians are really good and leading in many fields, dyslexia definitely being one of them. They have many good websites, and they have training for teachers who want to specialize in working with dyslexic children. At some point in my life, I was even thinking of doing this training and becoming a specialist, but you know that you cannot always control what you do in your life. Life obviously took me elsewhere. Anyway, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, dyslexia is a disorder involving difficulty in learning to read words, letters, and other symbols. It literally means trouble with words. So dyslexia, the meaning of it, it defines that a person who is dyslexic has trouble with words. It is the term used to describe difficulties with spelling, writing, and reading. The challenges can come in many different forms and are not limited to reversals of letters and words. This is a common misconception. So dyslexia runs much deeper than just misspelling or reversals of letters in words, or words themselves in sentences. I very much like the definition that dyslexia Australia uses. It says that dyslexia is the capacity to process information differently, enabling innovative thought and perception. It is characterized by a visual and experiential learning style. Methods using this learning style allow dyslexic people to realize their capabilities and minimize the negative impact commonly developed by conventional methods. Because dyslexia has been around, I suppose, for as long as humanity, there are even now many different methods of learning when it comes to teaching people with dyslexia. But general learning in school, the way reading and writing are taught, is not tailored for children with this problem. So whoever was trying to develop methods, I think they started off with the method that is being used when children are learning letters, and then they're straining them and combining them into words. That does not work for dyslexic. So a dyslexic in general education will struggle, and that's a fact, and they always do. As I mentioned before, dyslexia runs much deeper than just problem with letters and words. Dyslexic people are often confused by letters, they're confused by numbers, words, sequences, or even verbal explanations. Reading or writing shows repetitions, additions, transpositions, omissions, substitutions, and reversals in letters, numbers, and or words. I'm sure that if you have encountered anyone with dyslexia, be it someone in your family or someone in your workplace or a student, that you have seen these occurrences. Dyslexics also exhibit feeling of seeing non-existent movement while reading, writing, or copying. As you have seen in the first slide, when we demonstrated how letters move around, that's that problem with vision in, but not really with vision, because nothing is wrong with vision. Dyslexic can see, but that's how they see. They see texts, words that almost dance on the page, and that can present a problem, obviously, when you're reading and even when you're copying a text or writing something. Dyslexics also have problems learning sight words. There are words, for example, dyslexic people can read and reread some texts and have very little comprehension. Nowadays, sometimes I read a bit slower, but I always understand what I'm reading. But dyslexia, as any other problem, has different sort of levels, if I may call them levels. People who are diagnosed with dyslexia can have a very mild problem, or they can have a severe problem. Now, having lived with it for 50 years, I would venture to say that my problem was mild, and good. I'm happy about that. But some dyslexics who have severe problems actually never overcome them, but that's very rare. I've read a lot about dyslexia, and most dyslexic people overcome reading and writing problems. they tend to spell phonetically, which is always a problem in English, obviously. In my language, in Croatian, that wasn't a problem, so phonetical spelling was great. But when I started learning English later on, that didn't work. So I needed to learn a new set of words, the same way I've learned for my mother tongue or my first language. Again, there is always confusion or weakness with letter order within words. I'm always checking spelling of words in English, especially, and even in my mother tongue. Sometimes I misspell words. People who I communicate with using modern technology, they have sort of developed a way of interpreting my messages. I'm sure very often I make mistakes. Sometimes when I'm posting on Facebook, I don't post until I've read the post a million times. And then I post it and then I reread it and I find mistakes. Some I correct, some I don't. Sometimes I don't even see mistakes. Now, how to help a dyslexic child learn a sight word? I've mentioned sight words before. This is how. Dyslexics need a picture because that is how they memorize words. They need to know what on means. On means that something is on something. So this is a good way. I wasn't aware of that, but this is the method that I'm using when I'm teaching prepositions in English language. I use it because it works for me, and even for my students who are not dyslexic, they like this. They like the presentation that I do for them. Because you don't need to be dyslexic to be a visual type when it comes to learning. Now, there is a lot of misinformation about dyslexia. In the beginning, a lot of specialists who were working on figuring out what goes on in brains of people who are dyslexic, they thought that dyslexics actually see letters backwards, that it was like a mirror vision. But that's not true. That's not how dyslexics see letters. This method or this theory, the method of teaching or correcting dyslexia, was developed on this theory by Samuel Orton, and it's really old. It's from 1920s. It's still a method that is very popular, and almost all dyslexia programs today are Orton-Gilligan based. It's been pushed as the only solution for over 80 years. In that time, the name has become well known. So if maybe you even remember it if you've ever done a course on dyslexia. They're based on outdated ideas from the 1930s. So if you have been using this method, stop doing it because it's outdated and it's incorrect. It's based on something that just simply is not true. And very often dyslexic people are featured, and they do appear in all walks of life. And I'm sure if you have a dyslexic friend that this person must have mentioned to you that, for example, Einstein was a dyslexic person. That is something that dyslexics like to say, because they need to point out that being dyslexic does not mean that you are not intelligent. On the contrary, dyslexics tend to be very intelligent. But I'm mentioning a 2001 blockbuster movie here, Pearl Harbor. Maybe some of you have seen it. Ben Affleck was in that one, and he was going for an eye test, and in that scene he informs the nurse who was administering the test that he can't read letters well. I just get them backwards sometimes. So obviously, whoever was preparing, whoever was doing the legwork for that film and preparing information about dyslexia must have read the Orton-Gilligan theory and has unfortunately mispresented dyslexia for viewers all over the world. Okay, now we actually move on to what I am really glad that I can talk about to you today. I don't know if you believe in coincidences. I really do believe in them, and I do believe that certain books come your way when you need them. For me, that happened recently. I came across a book that's called Psi, and it was written in 2010, but I didn't get it in 2010. I got it a year or 2 years ago. It was written by an author from Slovenia who chose to remain anonymous. So he never revealed his real name. He was referred to and is still referred to as Eros, and Eros is the main character in his book. In the book he presents, I'd like to take a moment just to show you the book. Mariana suggested that you should see it. So this is the book. See how well presented it is. I've never had such a beautiful book before. It has a silver casing, and inside it's black on one side and white on the other side. And what you cannot see here is an engraving. That's Eros. That's the main character of the book. A naked man, looking really handsome. And you see it's silver here, and the pages are really nice and smooth. It's very, very nicely printed. The author of the book published the book himself. He financed the book. Together with the book, he also made public a method of teaching dyslexic people how to read. It's a unique method, and it works. But to be able to understand the method, you first need to know about the theory that he presented in the book. It's called REI Theory, and it is the first psychological model that allows insight into the functioning of our minds. A lot of psychologists so far have given us theories on how our mind works. I'm sure that you know what people mean when they refer to our mind. That's that voice in your head that is constantly talking to you. That's your mind. And according to Eros and REI Theory, there are actually 3 different minds or information processes. They are called reason, emotion, and instinct. But beware of the fact that they do not actually, E does not stand for emotion, like in emotional, and instinct does not stand for instinct in that sense that we know the meaning of this word. Reason, I think it stands for reason. These 3 minds or processes interpret all the information, everything we hear and see or perceive around us. And they interpret what they see to us all the time. In 2004, a scientist by the name of Igor Kenda also published a work in the Journal of Psychology and Psychotherapy, and he actually analyzed the REI method or the REI theory presented by Eros in his book Psi. And according to this theory and method, reason is the logical an analytical processor, so mind, that provides awareness. And it is based on understanding. It deals with information based on concepts and formulation. It looks for connections and discover causes. It understands numbers and time. So this is the conscious mind, and the most developed and the most recent in the development. Then as far as emotion, or E, is concerned, it is the first of our subconscious minds. It operates based on images or visual processes and communicates in pictures. Please remember this. This is very important to remember if you want to understand dyslexia. And then there is instinct, which is the second of our subconscious minds. It is very suspicious, weary all the time, and critical. It operates through emotions linked with fears which have been experienced in the past. So we have one conscious mind, reason, and two subconscious minds. Emotion operating in images and visual processes, and communicating in pictures as well, and instinct operating with emotions. That's why I said don't interpret them literally, don't take them for the granted, and not use their name to interpret what they mean. All of these minds are equal, but they are constantly struggling, and they tend to want to dominate, to be the main processor of information, the main speaker in our mind, the main person, not really person, but the leading guy who tells us what goes on around us. They are all equal in terms of processing thought quality, so all the minds can think straight, but they have specific areas of activity, and they're all independent. And because of their autonomy, one operation is often interfering with the other two. So it's like if you could imagine that your mind consists of 3 operating systems, like computers, for example, and all of them are functioning independently and autonomously, and there's lots of interference because 2 of them could be trying to do the same thing, and later on you will see why this is important. The power ratio between the 2 minds forms as we grow up, and defines our character for the rest of our lives. Growing up in terms of character formation in REI method takes a long time. Our minds can switch in their power roles up until the age of 25, but the most active struggle takes place in puberty, of course. Very logical, isn't it? That's when most problems in our life occur anyway. And this is a representation of the characters that are formed according to this theory. What if you have a look, there are 12 of them, just like signs in the horoscope, and R, or the capital letters, represent the mind that is the strongest, the leading mind. In the first row, reason is the strongest one, and emotion and instinct are subordinated minds. Then in the next drawing, reason is the strongest one, but emotion is also pretty strong, and instinct is totally subordinated to these 2, and so on. Why are these things circled in red? Because all of them have very strong E, very strong emotion. And according to the REI theory, people who have E as the strongest or as equal in their character have dyslexia. It happens because when they start to learn to read and write, emotion takes over the role that is normally performed by reason. Reason is the conscious mind. That's the mind that masters numbers and letters, and that's the mind that should be reading. But in people who have E in the dominant or equal role, their emotion wants to read, and it does read. Otherwise, dyslexic people would never learn to read. So it's good news. Now, how does E read? It can assign phonemes to individual letters. Remember my story. I was able to learn individual letters, but cannot assemble them together into a word. Like I couldn't. My sister could. I couldn't. I couldn't read out words, although I knew all the letters. A sequence of letters is then remembered as an image or a picture, and is linked with a picture of that word. What a dyslexic would typically do, and I'll give you an example of a simple word, cat, C-A-T. That's a string of letters that represents the word for cat. You take a picture of your mind, takes a picture of that word, and it makes an association of a picture of a real cat in your brain, and then you know that it's a cat, and every time you see it, you know it's a cat. However, such reading may involve stalling, because E needs some time to process images, and also because it cannot memorize all the words that there are. It memorizes up to 800 or 1000 words, and then it adds different endings and flexions, because it is far easier to just memorize root words, because it's practical, and because our brains are not computers, we cannot store that much information, and there's no need to. So when a dyslexic person is reading, they work out the endings and they add them up in accordance to other words, in accordance to meaning in the text. And this actually means that sometimes dyslexics can even read faster than other people, because they're reading pictures, they're reading whole words, they're not stringing letters together. And this reading method stays with dyslexic people for life. And all of them eventually learn to read. I'm not sure, I cannot tell you how I read now, but I think that I actually read words, that I do not string them together. The words that I cannot recognize, then I need to string them together and to work out what they are. And one more slide about the reading capabilities of emotion. It presents images in such a way that it sees elements from all angles, and its perception of letters is spatial, not special, but spatial. And that's why letters P, and D are the same. And a dyslexic person rotates them until a remembered word is recognized. And many of the mistakes that I make when I'm writing are associated with these three letters. They also have problems with words that have letters that look the same from the front and behind, letters like I, am, and the others that are here on this slide. If a dyslexic person does not recognize a word, it will, this is a very simple example, but for example, if a dyslexic person does not recognize no, it will turn it around and read on, because on also works. Symmetrical numbers also represent problems for dyslexic people, numbers like 0 and 8, or similar words, and in English there are many. wonder and wonder, they also present problems. But thanks to REI Theory, and now I would say for the first time, there is an explanation to what is going on in a mind of a dyslexic person, because so far scientists have not been able to explain why dyslexic people have problems reading. The solution that is offered in REI Theory is revolutionary in the sense that Eros claims that, as mentioned before, people who are dyslexic, and predominantly they are men, not women, because men are usually dominated by emotion, by this mind. They simply need to relearn to read using the R processor. And the system is very well presented and available to everyone on his webpage. The link to this webpage is at the bottom of this presentation, so you will get it. And it involves 7 stages, and it involves replacing letters and numbers, and it may take, the training itself may take up to a year. Numbers gradually replace all the letters, and then the person can in the long run revert to letters and be able to read like any other person who does not have the dominant or equal E processor. So this is what it does. It uses double denoting of phonemes and letters with numbers. So A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, and D is 4, and so on. 26 letters. It works wonderfully. And Reason can learn letters, can learn numbers, and can learn this sequence. Reason doesn't have a problem with numbers. It doesn't have a problems with letters, and that's why it is so good at reading. And that's why people who have a dominant or equal reason in their character have no problems learning to read. So a simple word, dad, can be written in different ways. It can have two numbers and 1 letter, and so on. I've written this just as an example, so you can see it, because this is a sort of talk when I'm just giving you the carrot. I couldn't do more for you this time around. Has the theory been tested? You're probably asking yourself. Now, of course it has. It has been tested by other nations. For example, in China, the Chinese letter does not use letters. They use symbols or images, and therefore there are no dyslexic people there. Then another test to this theory is people who stutter and have speech problems, but can sing without a problem. Why? Because singing is the activity controlled by emotion. I'm sure you are aware of this fact, that people who stutter can sing. They can read the text singing, but cannot read it without singing. And actually, this is often used as a technique when speech therapists work with people who stutter. Eros also explains that people who stutter have the same problem as dyslexic people, and that is the problem of their emotion wanting to do the task that normally belongs to reason. Recently in Slovenia, a psychologist agreed to test the method. Her name is Maša Blaznik, and she used the method to teach a boy to read. And she did so within a year. So a dyslexic child learned to read without a problem using this method. And now this method is also being tested in Croatia by a speech therapist, Valentina Martan. She's currently testing the method. I have to say that I am really proud that this revolutionary method comes from our neighborhood, from Slovenia, and I hope that people in Croatia and in this region will also want to learn about it and will learn from their colleagues, and that this method will spread around as a virus. It is sound and viable, and most importantly, it works. In the method that is free and is online and accessible to anyone who wants to use it, the author gives a list of words, he gives texts, so it's something that you just download and you work with your child at home or with your student in your classroom. But going back to what you can do starting as of tomorrow, when you return to your classroom, to your work situations, I would like to urge you to read and learn about dyslexia, and I would like to ask you to pay attention to new research and recommendations. So stay away from something that was written in the 1920s or 30s. Thanks to modern technology, we now have access to a lot of information online, and every serious country has a site that deals with dyslexia. I strongly recommend the Australian site. UK site is also very good. There are many experts around the world now being able to help you using online tools. I have not used any of them because I can read and write, but I have had a look at them, and I'm really glad that they are there. Also, now thanks to modern technology, we can use different fonts for dyslexic people. And if you can use them, do not print out on white paper, because dyslexic people see in images. The more color, the better, and hence my presentation, which looks very colorful. And I must say that I like color in all the things that I do. If you could see my house now, you would know what I mean, but I like color. Maybe it's because I'm dyslexic. What you can do for your students is let them know that you understand their problem, and that you understand them, and that you care for them, and that it isn't really a problem. Demystify it for the student and for other students also. Don't let other students make fun of a dyslexic child, because there's no reason to do that. But children, when they're school age, they tend to sort of be malicious sometimes. So try to mellow it down. Try to get them to understand what dyslexia means. And most important, to understand that a dyslexic child is equally capable of doing everything that another child who is not dyslexic does. If you don't have to, do not ask them to read out loud, because it will be a problem for them, and will create the sort of trauma that I suffered when I went to school. Give them extra time when they're doing tasks, especially reading comprehension. Give them extra time, they need it. It's not as a whim. Sometimes I'm really disappointed. I work in education, obviously. I work amongst teachers, people who are qualified to teach. And some of them do not have a lot of understanding for people with reading problems. I've heard a complaint the other day of dyslexics being allowed extra time in their mature exams in our country. If you are a dyslexic person and you register to your national agency and let them know that you're dyslexic, you will be awarded extra time. But the people who have to monitor exams complain about that. Imagine, I bet they wouldn't be complaining if it was their child. But, people are just people. That's who they are. That's why it is important to always talk about these things and to make people understand. Most importantly, recognize the signs early on and alert the parents and get them the professional help as early as possible. This is very important for people in primary education, where children are starting to learn how to read and write. They will exhibit different problems. If they're having problems reading and writing, it does not necessarily mean that it is dyslexia. It may be a developmental problem. And that's why, for example, in Croatia, referral for diagnosis in dyslexia is at the age of 8, which I think is very, very late. In other countries, the referral is much earlier, but in Croatia, speech therapists, at least that's what they've told me, they need to wait out to rule out any developmental problems. And they say that at the age of 9, all developmental problems should stop, and that is the age when they can actually go ahead and do assessment for dyslexia. I don't subscribe to this point of view. I think early recognition is very important. Here are now the links that I mentioned before. I have put a link here for the article by Igor Kenda, where you can see the method presented in a scientific way and well justified, or you can go straight to the REI method on the website of the book. And there is also a forum for dyslexia, so you can read about the experiences of other people. I would like to ask you to be the ambassadors of this method. Of course, first familiarize yourself with it, read it. It may not click with you, but if you recognize it as something valuable, then do not keep it to yourself. Recommend it to people that might benefit from it. And the most important thing is that it is free, so no one has to pay anything to get access to this learning method. Okay, that's all I have to say, and I see that I've used almost all the time, if not all of it. So Mariana, back to you.
No, it's okay. We started a bit late, so it doesn't matter. Thank you so much, Dragana. There have been several questions. I myself I'm having so many questions, but I can always ask you later.
Sure.
First, I would like to read the questions from Ljubica. Ljubica Ruzvinsky, I think I'm pronouncing the surname. She has a question for you saying, do dyslexic children have bigger problems reading and writing in their own language or in a foreign language, like as you mentioned English, or it is the same?
It is the same. It's the same. But what happens, you remember when I was explaining the REI method, and I mentioned that the 3 minds constantly struggle for power when we are growing up. So for dyslexic children, when they start to read and write, if the emotion is the strongest mind, it will try to dominate the skill that is needed for reading and writing. So this problem will then present. And nowadays, children are starting to learn to read and write their mother tongue and the foreign language at the same time. So the problems actually in school, in terms of school and education, present at the same time. In my case, I started learning English later. Because at that time we first had our mother tongue taught, and then I think in the 4th grade foreign languages were introduced, and in the 4th grade it was just playing and learning songs and learning words. Actually, that it was great because the teacher was using pictures, and then she would show us a picture of a word and say the word, and I was brilliant. I could memorize everything. And writing and reading started in the 5th grade. By that time I was 11, but I don't remember that I struggled with English as much as I have with my mother tongue. And then I must say that when I told you that there are coincidences in life, when I read the book and I read about the method, the dyslexia learning method, reading and writing method, I contacted the author of the book because he was accessible. You could write to him by email. And I explained to him what was going on in my life and how it all worked out for me. And what he told me is that obviously a reason stepped in. So by the time I started to learn English, reason already has pushed emotion away and started to dominate this skill of learning and writing. So it helped me. I hope this answers your question. It was a long answer, sorry.
I think it will take a little bit to all of us, especially me, for all this to sink, to settle down, because that's new. That's and right. I have been only teaching to a dyslexic only once. He was already 18. He knew that he was dyslexic. His mother was a teacher, so she did a lot with him during the primary education. Unfortunately, the language teachers, in this case English language teacher, didn't have much approach like this kind of approach, like using symbols, using images and so on. So he struggled a lot with English, and I had to work with him for like a year or something. We practiced for his Matura exam, as you already mentioned, and the students who are dyslexic and they have the paper that they get, for instance, they write English about 60 minutes, but they get 50% extra time, which would mean he wrote 90 minutes longer. But the point is, his mother told me that it's like just making his letter bigger or using Arial as font or something like that. He, in a way, could have been used to have a different kind of test, maybe an assistant who would rather reread a question once or twice because it's stressful. That's an exam. That's not in the classroom. We wrote, and I hope something is going to be changed. So, but let me refer and go back to another question. There have been many questions. First of all, let me just tell to the colleagues. The recording will be published on YouTube by tomorrow or by the end of the week. I have to wait for the recording to be available on eTwinning. As soon as it's going to be available, I download it, I create it and post it online. The presentation, Dragana has allowed us to use the presentation. It will be in PDF, only privately shared with us colleagues in our group, and of course all the links, the screenshots, everything you shared in the chat will be archived and in our group. So I hope it will help you to come back, to reread later, to explore and to research, and as Dragana said, to be an ambassador of this topic, especially if you are teaching or have somebody who is dyslexic. Okay, now my next question is coming from, I hope I wrote it. How many dyslexic students did you have? What do you think, Dragana? Did you have dyslexic students? Or maybe this is a good question for everybody in this webinar.
I have actually diagnosed in quotation marks. I have diagnosed a couple of children myself because I worked in primary education for a while. And I've seen students who were struggling, and the first sort of sign is writing. If they're having problem writing, if their handwriting is messy, that is usually the first sign. And I referred them. I asked the school a specialist, a speech therapist, and psychologist to refer them. And that was when they were 7, and they were dyslexic.
Yes.
Maybe it was a good guess. But
maybe, I don't know, it was Songu or Simona asking the question. She just wrote in the chat that she thinks that in Italy there is a lot of students who are diagnosed with dyslexia, and Songu is writing now. So I don't know, I really don't, I only have this one experience. Maybe some students are not diagnosed, or maybe are never diagnosed. You mentioned that there are mild type of dyslexia or complicated types. So it's hard for us, but you said also, I think I'm going to quote you, most dyslexic overcome their problem, and this is what you actually did, and you did it by the age of 14 by yourself, when somebody finally noticed that there is something wrong, that you have some kind of a learning disability problem, but it's not like it's not overcome. It was possible, and I'm glad that you are sharing your experience with us.
And now I understand how I did it. Thanks to the book and the method,
yes.
I understand how I did it. Otherwise, I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, I think there was a question that the early you diagnose somebody, the best it will be let's say the solution for him or her. You said most of that men have dyslexia, will be solved. They would be able to read without any problem. So it's like our brain is a software, and you just reverse it to the reason part, not the emotional part. Emotion part.
Emotion, exactly. Yeah.
I would like to ask a question to the colleagues who are still here. Do you think that this was really something revolutionary for us to understand how dyslexic brain work? And for me, this was really, really interesting. Simona also mentioned, she's mentioning Stephen Krashen's theory. She says, does it derive from Krashen's theory on learning? Probably this theory you have suggested and presented. And if she remembers well, she says that he gave a paramount importance to emotion. What do you think? Was Stephen Krashen's learning theory mentioned? Maybe was Krashen also reading a lot about psychology? Did you understand the question?
I don't know if I can comment on this.
Yeah, maybe we are not capable of commenting, but I would say that teachers, in this case, a language teacher and people who are doing with the language, like David Crystal and everybody, I suppose that this is something that is definitely connected, the brain and the letters. When we learn a faculty about the meta language, it's really hard to combine the words, the letters, the signs, yeah, well, it's not my dog. Okay, I think we will have Dragana back again, but I would just like to thank Dragana and
need to let the dog out.
Yeah, who let the dogs out?
I did.
Yeah. Okay, and one more thing. I would like to thank Stavrula and everybody who have shared any links in the chat. Thank you, ladies. You have been more helpful. And Athanasia also mentioned that she's using Arial font, and that she's also mentioned. I mentioned the sans serif, and she explained that are the two fonts that could be used a lot with dyslexic students. And we noticed that you probably also had this calculia or something we couldn't figure out because we were chatting.
Yes.
We said, isn't it interesting that a math teacher noticed that she has problems with reading? And somebody mentioned maybe that, like this calculia.
You see, she just paid attention to. Most probably. I mean, I'm not a maths teacher. There you go.
Well, I would like to thank you, Dragana.
Yeah, when it comes to numbers, I always let my husband do that. You know, I don't do banking for us or anything that is linked to numbers. You know, maybe something is telling me that I'm not good for that.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I'm good with money and numbers myself. So, but and I'm not dyslexic. So, that's something else. It's like emotion of maybe spending too much money or something like that. Okay. I just somebody says Wafa says that this dyslexia or any kind of topic that we are talking here could be a good eTwinning project. Who knows what Wafa is thinking of, but I'm sure as we are partners also on eTwinning, there could be many ideas. Yes, famous people that have dyslexia, like Einstein, and even the famous British writer. You mentioned Einstein, and I'm going to mention Agatha Christie, right? Wafa or somebody mentioned that Tom Cruise also had. Yes, Tom will mention Tom Cruise
She
also is
was also.
dyslexic. They say. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I think
Hmm.
we have already
Many,
have
many
another
famous
evening
people.
project. So, Dragana, we are going to ask you to join us. Maria, Wafa, and I are joining the eTwinning project about dyslexia and famous people. So you never know. We are going to invite you. Yeah, I mean everybody's in. Okay,
Okay.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. And I hope that you are all pleased that we had Dragana, who not only shared her personal perspective of being dyslexic, she's an English teacher, people, and she's a teacher, and she lives with dyslexia for many years now. She overcome it. She understood, and she has, in a way, gave us a lot of information how we can use her personal story to work with our students. Thank you so much, and don't forget to sign for your certificate. I'm going to post the link for the Google form for you to fill in one more time. And I hope I'm going to see you after the summer. The recording will be posted, as I told you, by the end of this week. There will be lots of webinars in autumn, about 3 of them, and there will be certain activities that I hope you will all participate. Please retweet, share our inclusive education group, and I hope we are going to have 2,000 people by the end of 2016. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Have a nice summer and enjoy yourself. Dragana, one more time, thank you for being our guest, our fifth inclusive education guest speaker. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for inviting me. Goodbye.
Bye.